You may start, please.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending on which part of the world you are in. My name is Malik, and I'll be the moderator of today's session. A very warm welcome to all of you today. This is the second in our series, or webinar series, as a partnership between Bait Al-Mashura as well as the Global Impact FinTech Forum, where we bring together experts and thought leaders from all over the world as we discuss some of the most important and relevant topics for digital finance as well as fintech and blockchain. So on that note, today it's my pleasure to be hosting a panel with 4 global experts from different parts of the world. We have an amazing panel with panelists from Indonesia, Malaysia, Dubai, Pakistan, as well as Paris. And the topic for today is something which is not only very, very relevant, but one that is very close to my heart and our hearts, which is digital financial inclusion and how can we use technology for driving more inclusive societies. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce my 4 amazing panelists. I will just call out their names and then I will request each one of them to do a very short introduction about themselves. So I will go in alphabetical order. First, we have Mr. Dima Dejani from Indonesia. He is the CEO of Al-Mashura. Next, we have Rizwan from Malaysia. Again, a very well-known and well-respected fintech leader and the founding president of the Fintech Association of Malaysia. Next, we have Sahana Arun Kumar, who's a very well-respected and a veteran professional on digital financial inclusion. She has worked in different parts of the world with an special expertise in the MENA region in Middle East as well as Africa and also Latin America. And last but not the least, we have Salman from Dubai, currently in Pakistan, who's been a regular feature at blockchain conferences all over the world. He's been with me at blockchain conferences from the US to Istanbul, and he's a regular feature at blockchain summits all over the world. So once again, it's my pleasure to host these 4 experts from all over the world. And without further ado, I would request them to do a very quick round of introductions, starting with Dima, Rizwan, Sahana, and finally Salman.
Thank you very much, Malik. Assalamualaikum, everyone. My name is Dima from Indonesia. I'm the founder and CEO of Alami, currently the leading Islamic fintech out of Indonesia. Our business model is peer-to-peer on SME lending. So we provided working capital loan mainly for growing SMEs in several sectors in Indonesia. And recently we're expanding ourselves to launch the Sharia digital banking platform also in Indonesia. And after closing fundraising, Series A fundraising from several investors. So I think that's a short introduction about myself and Alami. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. My name is Rizwan Aziz. In this session, I am the country director as well as one of the founding individuals of World Remit, a global remittance company based in the UK. We started the business about 10 years ago, and I'm now heading the ASEAN expansion. Alhamdulillah, we are in 50 countries licensed with a SEN license and managing about 7,000 payment corridors, and so we will share further in terms of what we do and how we can contribute to the topic. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Hana Kumar and thank you Malik for the pre-introduction. I'm very excited to be here today. As Malik mentioned, I've worked in the digital and financial inclusion space now for over 13 years. And I had the pleasure to work in Qatar as well when it was QTEL at that time. Orido right now was looking into their mobile wallet services. So have worked a lot in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and also Latin America, helping clients to digitalize their processes, but also their offerings to the client. And ever since COVID started, there's much more focus on how do we get this to the grassroots levels. And I'm very excited to see also some of the innovations happening in this space and looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you again.
Hi, good day, everyone. And just to start with a funny thing, I wish my parents would have named me with the alphabet A, so I could have gone first for the introduction. But anyways, my name is Mohammed Salman Anjum. I'm the chief mate, or chief executive officer for the Invoice Mate, which is the invoice management system powered by blockchain, first ever in the world. And also I'm the head of BSV Blockchain Hub in the Middle East and South Asia region. The whole point, as Malik has said as well, that an educator first, and after that an entrepreneur. So the whole point is about educating ecosystem about the digital interventions, especially with the new technology named as blockchain.
Sorry,
Malik,
I was on mute. Yeah. So that's just habit, with Zoom, you just put yourself on default. So thank you, everyone. And as you can see, we have a pretty diverse panel. So it's my responsibility to try and bring out the best from these experts and try and bring out different perspectives, not just in terms of regions, but also in terms of their expertise. And we'll try and look at digital financial inclusion from a 360-degree perspective. With that, let me start. And obviously, the fact that even all of you in the audience are here means you are either interested in financial inclusion or inclusive societies, or you believe in that and you believe it's a worthwhile cause. Whether you look at the World Bank reports or any of the latest reports, it says anywhere from 1.4 to 1.7 billion unbanked adults are there worldwide, or underbanked adults, unbanked and underbanked. And many of us have spoken on this topic at many conferences all over the world. Sahana has been with me at conferences, Dima, Rizwan, even Salman. We keep talking about inclusion. We say digital inclusion, economic, financial, and also social inclusion. But my first question is really to start with first principles on how do we specifically define inclusion, especially financial inclusion. And this again comes from the fact that depending on which conference you go to or which speaker you hear, there are quite a few ideas floating around. Some people will give you examples of how certain countries have opened bank accounts at scale and therefore they claim they have achieved inclusion. Other countries talk about wallets and transaction accounts. There are some case studies on micro insurance, etc. There are, in fact, from a definition and taxonomy perspective itself, I think we are not very, very aligned. And again, depending on whether you talk to people from the World Bank or any of the development agencies, they may have a slightly different perspective. So I'll start with this, very fundamental question to both Rizwan and Sahana, because they have been working in this space for a long time. What, in your view, is financial inclusion? What is your idea of inclusion? And why do you believe that is how we should look at or measure financial inclusion? We'll start with you, Sahana, and then Rizwan, if you can add to it.
Thanks very much, Malik. It's a very pertinent question. And as you say, there are different ideologies and ideas that go behind. I mean, from my opinion and, being in this space for so long, I would, put a handful of criteria or important things behind that. One is we have the notion of informal market and a formal market. So if we are trying to bring people into a formal financial space, whatever be the instrument, whether it's a bank account or a wallet or a card, but helping them to go from a purely cash, purely, under the mattress or informal kind of dealing to something that is more formalized. That could be one aspect. But coming from a more client-centric perspective, it really needs to help the end customer. So you yourself said we can open bank accounts, but are people actually using it, right? So inclusion is how can we actually offer something to these end users that is actually meaningful to them and that actually helps them in managing their daily financial lives when we talk about financial inclusion, right? So, opening an account just to have money withdrawn from it is not really inclusion. How can we inculcate the habit of using the account, and why would it be worth their while to learn how to use it and to actually put their money in that account or the wallet and use it? So I would put that under usability. The third aspect would be protection and offering the service responsibly. And so in that sense, are we actually helping them when we're offering something formalized, something useful? Is that something that then helps them manage their finances better, helps them access finance better? So maybe I leave it at that, and we'll contribute more to the discussion as it goes along.
Thank you, Sahana. Rizwan?
Yeah, thank you, Malik. Thank you, Sarah. I think that's a very, very wise opening by Sarah. I just want to add a little bit in terms of when you talk about inclusion. Based on what we see and what we have actually experienced, all of us, in terms of comparing the incumbents as well as either the TechFin or the FinTech that's coming into the market and trying to solve all these issues. I see inclusion as a three-part thing. One is in terms of providing relevant ways via technology-enabled innovations, either channels or business model or product services and whatever, for those under or unserved by the incumbent, by the existing financial services stakeholders, and the purpose is actually to elevate their livelihood. So if you think and look at what has been what I've seen actually so far, there's three things that when we talk about inclusion, it is about using technology and creating innovation, and then looking at how and the reason why the underserved or unserved are not actually being looked at by the incumbent financial services stakeholders, and looking at also the effort to improve the livelihood and how we get elevated. So when you talk about why, Malik asked about why just now, these are the three things that I continuously came across in many of the projects that I get involved in, either as the FinTech Association or when I was a regulator back 20 years ago. The incumbent are using technology as a tool, but they are not really changing their mindset. So this is where I think now it has come to realization by many that if you have innovation, technology-based, and use a different approach and a mindset, I think that would be giving you a different result. And secondly, most of the financial services institution, the mere existence of them to actually maximize their shareholders' wealth and not focusing on providing values to their customers and their key stakeholders, I think that's the second reason why I think we are having these issues with inclusion. And when the third thing is when I talk about elevating livelihood, and this is where I think it has two sides of the coin. One is in terms of the financial services pushing and just shoving the product without caring about what really is needed by their customers and by their stakeholders, as well as the responsibility of the customers to be aware and to continuously be engaged with what's going on in the market. So I think that will open up in terms of why inclusion needs to happen. I think what are the key aspects in terms of the inclusion and the approach that we should be thinking of, and approach and ways that I personally have actually experienced, and I love to hear from others in terms of what you guys think about this topic as well. Thanks, Malik. I just stop there.
Thank you, Rizwan and Sahana. So I think if I summarize, there were quite a few common points on how you view inclusion from a broader perspective. So one is, of course, I think both of you spoke about customer centricity and putting the customer at the center rather than, as you said, incumbents want to push their products and services vis-a-vis this. Inclusion is really about putting the customer in the center, and then as an extension, you also spoke about helping lives and livelihoods, and Sahana said the same thing in a slightly different manner when she said it is bringing them in more into the formal economy, and therefore they don't have to be dependent on money lenders and those usury kind of instruments which are exploitative. So there is at least a fair access, if not an equal access, to financial services. And the third, of course, is I think that was an excellent point as well, Rizwan, about larger stakeholder benefit versus just a narrow view of shareholder benefit. So I think that's a great segue to the next question I have, since both of you have spoken so much about solving specific problems and putting the customer and putting lives and livelihoods at the center. My next question is to both Dima and Salman. They are practitioners. They are actually running companies which are trying to solve problems of customers in developing countries. So my question is, now that we've at least heard a certain broad definition of what inclusion is or could be, what do you say are the top one or two challenges in your view, or problem statements as we would call it in the world of startups, especially in emerging markets, that digital finance can help overcome? And this could be, not just from a financial inclusion standpoint, but from, as Rizwan said, from an economic inclusion standpoint, from a technology inclusion standpoint, or even from a social inclusion perspective. And on that, perhaps tell a little more about what your organizations are doing specifically in these areas to solve these problems. So one is, which are the pain points that you think are the burning issues which need to be solved? And two, related to that, how are your organizations actually going about solving those problem statements? So Salman, we'll start with you, and then Dima, please share your perspective as well. Salman, did you hear that? I think we've lost him. Is he frozen? So maybe Dima, you want to go first, and then let Salman come in.
Yeah, sure. I think Salman has a. Yeah, he's back.
I'm back. I don't know what happened, but anyway, sorry for that.
No worries, Salman. So I hope you got my question. My question was about the problem statement and how your companies or your products are trying to solve that. So if your connection is okay and stable, perhaps you can go first, Salman, and then we'll request Dima to also share and also talk about how your companies are trying to solve for those problems specifically.
Right. So as Rizwan mentioned, the challenge, I think, is the mindset, not just with the startup owners or entrepreneurs. It's also the approach of the users as well, and also the institutions as well, whether they are incumbent or the new players coming into the market. The whole point of digital inclusion is not to just give a new digital access point to the users. It's basically about the expectation enhancements of the customers by experience specialists. So we need to bring experience specialists, customer experience specialists, who can design the new digital interventions between the new applications, mediums, and the users. By now, only 19% of the whole companies, they're having some kind of a customer experience specialists. So they are not identifying, most of the companies, most of the startups, they're not identifying exactly what customers are asking for when they are looking for the digital inclusion. They just don't need a new access point through their app or through their mobility device. They need more than that. They need a new business model. They need new business opportunity. I'll just give a relationship here by establishing Uber is bringing a new business model. It's not just the inclusion factor in terms of the mobility ecosystem, but it is a new ecosystem, a new business model as well. So this is something which fintech also needs. It's not just bringing a new accounting, the banking systems. You need to identify where are the pain points in the existing financial systems. As you asked how we are solving those pain points, we identified that the invoice processing is one area where there is a pain point for the incumbent and also the all kinds of users, whether they are clients, suppliers. So there was a need in that area, and there is a big influx of the different pain points in that whole process. For example, the integrity of the invoice, sometimes there is under invoice, over invoicing, fake invoicing. So the fraud resilience was a big need there. And a blockchain, what we used is the core purpose was to do that fraud resilience. So you can bring up the efficiency factors for the user experience. You can bring up the, in our case, when we are using the point of the blockchain as a solution. So again, the reason was to bring the user experience to the next level, and that is the trusted workflow of the invoice processing and management. So the whole point I'm like trying to emphasize is experience, but identifying the needs first. Where are the gaps in existing systems, and how the new technologies, how the new digital interventions can bring value, not just by giving a new access point, but giving a new opportunity and business models.
Thank you, Salman. So I think that was a great point you made, that it is not just about an access point or an app or a front end. You have to really start with the pain point of the customers, and the whole value chain has to then, in certain cases, be either relooked at or even reworked. And you gave this great example of invoice financing or invoicing as being a pain point, and obviously, right from the accuracy to paper-based processes to even fraud or double issuance and all sorts of fraudulent activities. There is obviously a pain point both for the recipient and for the maybe the lenders, and therefore blockchain can solve it by making or enabling trustless transactions, something that many of us who've been in the blockchain space can relate to. This is a classic use case of blockchain solving a real problem in the whole value chain, and it's not just about one entity, it solves it across the value chain. So I think that's a great segue to go to Dima, because he is actually running a company that is in the business of lending and Islamic lending with the Sharia principles in mind. So tell us, Dima, what exactly is the pain point that Alami identified, and how did you go about solving it? And once again, congratulations, you've been going from strength to strength. For those who don't know, Dima is also my former Citibank colleague, so it's always good to see somebody, a former colleague, doing well and getting funding from very, very marquee investors globally. So tell us more about how Alami is going about it, and where does this digibank or virtual bank come in as well?
Sure. Thanks, Malik. And yeah, I agree. I guess the biggest pain points that our users currently facing are quite multiple. So let me start with trust. So when we're talking about the Islamic finance, and it might vary per region, but in Indonesia, it's somehow closely associated with scam. So there are so many scams using Sharia angle, and still there's a lot of people are still tricked by those kind of scams, right? So generally the image when you go into the Islamic finance and it's for investment, it's not good and it's not professionally run. So this is the stigma. And recently in Indonesia, there have been multiple, I would say, incidents for the industry as well. Key opinion leaders saying that bank Sharia, there's not Sharia banks are not um, well run and all of these things. So it's created a chaos in the industry. So I guess that's one is trust, and then second is what do you call it? Access, basically easy access, competitive. It's like classic, but I think in a country like Indonesia where the financial penetration, it's still like banking penetration is about 50%, yeah, and the technology penetration, some smartphone penetration is already way beyond that. So I guess this is like a challenge on the financial industry and how can include them into that service. So I guess the game for the digital banking going forward is really to utilize the existing ecosystem to reach out to the last mile. So I think we've been seeing crazy competition in Indonesia for digital banking space. We know, like for example, like one of the digital bank, they tap into the Gojek and Tokopedia ecosystem. Their valuation is currently about $30 billion plus, and they're currently the fourth most valuable banks by market cap in Indonesia, even though they just launched their products a couple of months ago. So the expectation on Indonesia, it's such a big market, and 50% banking penetration is so big because of uh, the activation for the SME and retail through e-commerce and other means. It's so big, and the financial institution will just embed their product into these partners. So there's so many consolidation, so many collaboration, and all of the marketplace e-commerce, they want to create their own bank. So I guess for that, we in Alami, and how we want to solve this problem is obviously first, trust is very important, and having trust means like we have like full permanent license from the regulator. We're also performing, so it's when the viewers see Islamic fintech player, they want to see it as competitive as the conventional as well. So we're catching up with some of the conventional players. We almost disbursed 1 trillion rupiah over the last 2 years. So it's about 75 million US dollars with 0% default. So that is actually something different in the market. And this is very appreciated by both investors and our users. So 30% of our users are actually like non-Muslim, and they really like us because of the NPL or NPF, and they get to learn the beauty of Islamic finance through that. We're also opening up an access piggybacking on our partner eFishery that have access to fish farmers. They're an IoT company, so we're able to lend out to fish farmers through their ecosystem, and we're replicating this model through different digital ecosystem there are out there, because they're when you talk about the micro, the financial inclusion most often is not because of access, but uh, because of the socio-religious reason. So most of them in SCSC and D are actually prefer to have a Sharia financing. So when we can get into them in a country like Indonesia, it's really valuable and competitive for us to compete with the much bigger players. So these are the things that we're trying to do. And in terms of the new banking that small bank that we acquire and trying to launch digital banking, I think this is mainly to address the concern that the Islamic banks in Indonesia are super slow and they are not millennials friendly. And the use case in terms of having different savings account for different purposes are not there. So inshallah, we're gonna launch our bank this month. We're working on regulatory approval, and currently we have the fastest onboarding process is 3 minutes on seamless onboarding using mobile. So inshallah, this will be trailblazing the Islamic banking industry in Indonesia, and hopefully we can expand our business. So thanks, Malik.
Thank you, Dima, and congratulations and good luck again. 3 minutes is definitely exciting, and we are looking forward to that. Of course, hopefully, if we get together or when we get together on another panel or specifically on digi banks, I think I have a lot of questions to ask you around your not just your onboarding process, but how you're going to make your bank profitable in the long run. But let's park that for maybe future conversations. So I think you had two key points, Dima, which again resonated with what the other panelists have said. I think you emphasized a lot on trust, and that's something we heard from Sahana and Salman and Rizwan as well. And also about the need for Islamic fintechs to become more, as you said, millennials aligned or millennial savvy, but also not be seen as very slow or traditional or being stuck in legacy thinking or legacy processes. So that is another interesting thing. Now I have, all the points that you've shared are great. And that again is a segue to my next question, which I'm going to ask Rizwan and Salman and Sahana, if you also want to kind of come in, please come and bring in your different perspectives. What we've heard is we have a two-sided challenge here. So we've heard access as being a challenge, but we also heard that it's not only about access, it has to be about customer centricity, solving real pain points. And the way I frame it, at least in my head, is I say there is a demand side challenge and there is a supply side challenge. And often when we talk about inclusion, many conferences, many thought leaders, or even many global agencies perhaps make this mistake of being a little too focused on the supply side. So they will talk in terms of new fintechs or new models, etc. But as we heard, it's equally important to look at the demand side and how we are solving for the real needs and problems of those who are excluded, and how can we create business models which can give them the best products and services at affordable rates. And that is where I say it's the 4 Fs. So faster, frictionless, freemium, and fun, or bringing in elements of gamification. How do you drive widespread adoption? So it's not just about having products in the market, it means they have to be used and adoption has to happen as well. So on the one hand, there is the 4 Fs. And then we also say that it has to be driven by the 3 Cs, right? Of customization or customized products, contextualization. So can you contextualize your offers or your products or services? And Dima, you had a great point. In this case, context for you also meant socio-cultural factors or religious beliefs. And that's why, as you said, in SEC, C and D, Sharia products are probably more popular because it aligns with their religious and socio-cultural norms as well. And the third again is the third C is community. So customization, contextualization, and community are the 3 Cs, and faster, frictionless, freemium, and fun. So as we would say, faster, cheaper, easier. What I would like, Rizwan, in your role as the founding president of the FinTech Association of Malaysia, you obviously have come across many fintechs. And Salman, you've come across many blockchain companies as well. Sahana, you've obviously worked in multiple countries and multiple regions. So apart from your respective companies, maybe give just 1 or 2 leading or successful examples of companies which have solved the demand side challenges as well by using these or applying these 3 Cs and 4 Fs. If you can give us some real life examples, I think that will also help our audience a lot. So perhaps Rizwan, you can go first and you can give examples from not just Malaysia, but Southeast Asia, and Salman, you can give from the MENA region.
Thank you, Malik. I'll bring you an example of how we look at the supply and demand side from what we have done in World Remit. From the supply side, what we have done is we are looking at it from creating an effective approach of how do we want to do the O2O approach, the offline to online approach, and focusing on those who are unreachable or unaware. So rather than just focusing on the demand side, which normally would turn into a product and services initiative, what we did was we pivoted towards looking at it from a demand side, where we started a green book project where we go out. Prior to the pandemic, we went out and really try to understand what's going on with the supply side and start to understand what are the causes of them being unreachable and unaware, whether they are uninterested or whether their level of education and whether their lifestyle or whatever that we can understand and learn from them. And then we create internally, based on that understanding on the supply side, a fintech playbook within the company in terms of how we really want to create an effective offline to online migration approach. And the community that we talk to and the people that we actually reach out, we maintain the communication and get them into the focus group and making sure that that communication is sustained. And this is where it gives us a lot of insights in terms of what can be done and give us a holistic perspective in terms of how, not only for us, but a holistic value creation program and framework in terms of how actually we can benefit them and them can be reached, can become reachable, as well as them for them to be aware, because some of them are aware but not interested. This is where it somehow goes into also the ESG as well as the ethical behavior side. So just to quickly, just to before I end, what we did was, as a result of this, we created an analytical engine called WITNL, W-I-T-N-L. What is this? What if this and that, and what if now or later? It's a single analytical engine that can be scaled and with cognitive capabilities that can transcend to become an AI engine at the end of the day. And we are trying to complete this and making sure that it can be introduced by next year. So it can create a symbiotic engagement between us, the digital financial services provider, with the customer, whether they are reachable, whether they are whatever situation they are, because the symbiotic connection actually allow us to reach out to the most unreachable people and get them to understand what we are trying to do and what kind of value that we are trying to create. So that's the kind of thing that we are doing now. And I've been actually utilizing this both for world ranking as well as one of the digital bank in Malaysia that I'm also helping to create as well. So I just want to share that that's what I'm doing now at this point. Thank you very much, Malik.
Thank you. Salman? You're on mute, Salman.
Sorry. So for us, when it comes to 3 C's, we are focusing on the customization and the contextualizations, because it's basically when it comes to the customization, we are offering an add-on solution, which will work with the existing ERPs and the accounting packages. So we are giving a new feature of managing the invoices and taking them to a complete journey for payments. And then in case of financing as well, you can end up getting the finance as well for those invoices. So the whole point is to customize the experiences of, it's a B2B product, so it has to variance light where there is no customization we are offering, just to bring more and more people experiencing it. And then there is a customized or advanced version where we are customizing it for the existing integrations with the existing ERPs and accounting packages. There is always a different industries having a different formats of invoicing. Different industries have different like parameters and procedures for vendor onboarding, a supplier onboarding process. Then the most important for us is to give them a flexibility to customize their invoice reviewing and approval process, which is the core reason you're going to use this software. So if we don't give these flexibilities or customizations, I think again we'll not end up giving them the user experience they are seeking basically when they are using a new tool or application. So yes, the contextualization means that again now we are thinking of bringing it to the institutions, which can again to create more demand, like the digital bank like Dima has just shared with us. So we can have an integration with them. They can use for their invoice financing, they can use this as a tool, this as a bridge to have an authenticated, trustworthy invoices to finance. So this solution can work for them, not just for the clients. It can work for the institutions as well, for enabling them for their due diligence as well, for that perspective of the invoice financing. When it comes to the 4 F's, we are seeking the freemium model, because again, it's a new business model we are bringing. We are trying to bridge the customers with like a new business model through a software or app. So it is also a bridge between the crypto finance, which I have not shared yet. So there is a lot of crypto liquidity is there, and there's a bridge, there's a gap between the conventional businesses and the crypto liquidity. Crypto people are living in their own bubble. The conventional businesses are living in their own bubble. So there is a requirement of a bridge. So yes, this can serve as a bridge between the two sides. And I think to start with, we are launching in October of Q4. So freemium model we will use to educate people, bring more awareness, and trying to bridge the gap between the multiple sides.
Salman, you've made a couple of very interesting observations, and I just want to continue a little more on that. One is you spoke about how your solution can also be plugged in with other banks. So it's a B2B or a B2B2C or a B2B2B solution as well. And you gave the example of, for example, your solution could be plugged into Dima's new bank, which is coming in, and you could be the engine which gives these trusted invoices so they can do a better job of financing and have less risk of fraud. So essentially, this goes back to what we discussed right in the beginning about efficiencies in the value chain. And when we talk about inclusion or financial inclusion, I think this is a classic example of use of technology, emerging technology, smart technologies to reduce and in my 4Fs, also reducing friction in the whole process, but also making the process, reducing gaps in the whole value chain so that, if there are fewer fraud losses, then perhaps companies like Dimas can do lending at more fair rates or more competitive rates, and therefore, the MSMEs which are most impacted by the pandemic can have more fair and equitable access to finance. Obviously, it's an interesting example of how a technology like blockchain, at one end of the spectrum can solve for a very real problem in the economy, in society, and for those who are most affected by the pandemic. And I just wanted to bring that to life for our audience, that this is not just about, talking hypothetically. These are models which are trying to solve real problems, and there is a real opportunity that emerging technologies are providing us to solve the problem of inclusion like never before, bringing more efficiencies into the value chain like we never had before. And like Dima, I have worked in a bank for or in banks for 20 years. So I have seen how much inefficiency there is in the whole process and how something like this can bring about technology efficiency and therefore lower cost. But I just want to quickly go further. And I know Sahana has to leave in about 15-20 minutes, and there are some audience questions as well. So I'll just take this one, and Salman, this is to you and Sahana as well. You spoke about crypto liquidity, and that again is an example of there being a lot of idle liquidity on one hand, and there is a lot of need for credit in the real economy, if I were to say so, with the small and medium enterprises. I know this is a big topic in itself, and there is so much discussion around DeFi or decentralized finance, and people are now talking about kind of holding their stable coins or their tokens and getting an interest on that, and there is a parallel lending economy which is coming into play. I just want you to maybe spend a couple of minutes, Salman and Sahana, add to that on how the crypto economy, as you call it, which is now more than $1 trillion in market capitalization, can solve problems of the real world and go outside of the bubble. And Salman, you and I have been at blockchain conferences all over the world, so we know it's literally a bubble. People over there exist in their own world, and then there are these millions of MSMEs that Sahana tries to help, who are struggling for maybe working capital loans. So how can that be bridged? But I also have a question to all four panelists, and you are the experts at that. What is the Islamic finance view on crypto and crypto financing? Is it seen as Sharia compliant or not? And I think this is a gray area. This is a question which many are asking, and scholars are also trying to debate. So maybe on a concluding note, before we go to audience questions, can we address or at least try and answer that question as well? Is it compliant with the Islamic finance values or not? And if so, how do you foresee this industry evolving? So Sahana, if you want to go first, please do. And then we'll continue more with Salman on the crypto economy and the real economy.
I mean, starting off with me on a crypto question may not go to the real crux of it, Malik, but definitely there is a need. I think that if we're able to, bridge regulatory gaps and also financial literacy gaps, of the end users, then definitely crypto-based offerings can really work in my field. I mean, many of the markets are quite far from it. I mean, from a regulatory perspective, how do you even start offering crypto where everybody's talking about it, but there's no real blueprint on how to go about it, for example. And then also from the the owner, the mom and shop side, there is digital savviness, of course. People are using phones and people know how to use different apps, etc., where there is connectivity. But there is some, ways to go for educating and explaining how this would work, I think. I mean, and obviously those that come from markets like Indonesia or others where, this is very rampant, it might seem, very distant what I'm saying. But in many markets, we're still trying to, grasp data as a source of analytics to be able to get mainstream banks and microfinance institutions to actually offer credit based on just purchases and, sales of the shopkeeper. So there's definitely a need, but I would say that the different markets are very, very far or close with how they can deal with crypto. And so it's, for me, yet to be seen in markets, especially where it's very, very nascent. So.
Thank you, Sahana. Salman, if you can continue with your points.
Yes, the point was that, as you mentioned, been a regular feature of the different blockchain events around the world for last 5 years. And I have observed very closely the ecosystem that is lacking a connection with the conventional businesses. Most of the crypto people are coming from like a non-corporate backgrounds, non-conventional business or job background. So they don't have an idea of solving the real pain points through this new medium. Crypto, let's not go into the debate of regulatory or non-regulatory, but it can solve some real pain points of the conventional businesses. The problem with the crypto people is they're trying to solve futuristic problems, decentralized finance. Come on, let's solve the pain points of the existing centralized finance. Why centralized finance has issues, solve those problems rather than bringing up a new system, parallel system. Why don't you solve the problems of the conventional centralized system and bring those gaps, close those gaps of the trust from the centralized authorities and all that. So that's where we believe that not just us, we thought about it, all the other crypto and also the conventional sides as well. They are also thinking crypto as a like a taboo and it's not for them. No, it is for them. It's a $1.8 trillion worth market at the moment. Why you don't want to utilize that? It's sitting idle on exchanges, just a fake pumps and dumps happening in that liquidity. One, for the both sides, I believe adoption is a must. Conventional need applications to use that liquidity pool, and crypto people need some applications to reach out and solve the pain points of the conventional businesses. I'll leave it here because I can speak about it for a number of hours. It's been the area where I believe both sides needs a bridge.
Thank you. And I'll come back to the second question about whether this adheres to the principles of Islamic finance. But I'm just thinking, Dima and Rizwan, this is something, it's something that we've discussed as well, how to create a bridge between the crypto economy and the real economy. And there is so much liquidity, lying wasted there or idle there while we have needs in the real economy. And perhaps this is where entrepreneurs like you or people in the ecosystem like you and perhaps Dima, this is where your bank could be the bridge by, I don't know, acting as a crypto custodian or whatever, and using that wasted liquidity, in Salman's words, to solve real problems. And I hear you, Salman. This is what we've also discussed about. Why can't you solve the problems? Of course, you have to look at the opportunities of tomorrow, but there are so many problems of today that blockchain can solve. And in your own words, the invoice financing is a classic use case. There are so many other use cases in trade finance, etc., which blockchain can solve, and tokens can play a role in this rather than just endless speculation. But I agree, we'll park that because that's a discussion that we can go on for hours. So, and this question is not only to you, perhaps as a concluding question, I'll keep it open to Dima and Rizwan as well, and Sahana, if you have a view. Does crypto and does the crypto economy and if we have to take decentralized finance and lending through cryptos, is it aligned to the Islamic finance values, or nobody knows as yet?
Dima, you want to go first, Dima?
Yeah, okay, I'll take that. Thanks, Rizwan. Well, I mean, following up the previous topic, I would be like more than happy to tap into those opportunities. I mean, Revolut is already doing that, and I see that it's such a waste of liquidity as I said, and the stable coin needs to have an out, to kind of like increase steadily the value of that, and at the same time helping the real economy. So definitely there's a use case there. I haven't really seen it's being used elsewhere based on my limited observation, but I believe in the future, I think we're going to enter into that type of collaboration. I'm actually trying to discuss with like some of the large crypto exchange and the up and coming in Indonesia. It's called Pintu. The CEO is my friend. So we're trying to find like an avenue as well. And obviously, we're just hired like someone, a PhD from the UK on Islamic finance to really understand like the do's and don'ts, what are the borders and everything, because I would say the expertise in Indonesia might not think that far. So I guess UK is probably one of the, and Malaysia, two markets that probably already think that far. So I guess as a practitioner, I really welcome and keen to explore this more. And on decentralized finance, I'm totally 100% happy to support. Just to share just a little bit, I know it's running out of time. The context of decentralized finance, it's actually very close to community basis. Like in Indonesia, the concept of communities, especially on the Islamic community, is very strong, and they're so fragmented. But within their community, they're very, very they're like brothers and sisters, right? So we're actually trying to do real musharaka, which actually people really take losses within that community. So in a way, it's like decentralized also for communities, and they wouldn't mind to lose their money because they're helping their friends. Obviously, we're gonna help them and all of these things. So taking this community concept being decentralized and real decentralized finance, I think we can find an overlap that could be used for good. And this real musharaka is, I think, like things that like all the Islamic finance practitioners are waiting for, but it hasn't really taken off because nobody want to get having experience a loss. But if we segment it for communities, that they can really take the loss. So yeah, I guess that's kind of an interesting thing that we're observing also. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to be very quick here. What we are also doing, what I'm trying to do in Malaysia especially, is to also do an inclusion for the regulators, because I think a lot of us talk about reaching out to the customers, to those who may not understand fintech, and most often than not, we forget that the regulators are also not inclusive. They are also unaware of what's going on. So what we have initiated in Malaysia, we have this mandated by the government called a good regulatory practice. What we are trying to do is to understand the mindset of the policymakers and try to also understand what are the key common objectives that all the policymakers are trying to actually achieve. And we notice that all policymakers are trying to do three things. They are trying to authorize, where they give you license or they don't give you license. Secondly, they try to supervise. They will try to look at whether you follow or not the license condition. And then they try to discipline those who are not following what has been authorized. So we notice that these are the common traits of any regulators and whatever rules that they come up with. And to do that, we also make sure that they will understand what can they actually learn and how they can also be part and become key stakeholders in the entire ecosystem. So by including them in the conversation and making them aware and continuously making them be part of the discussion, I think it really helps. I know that the progress may not be seen obvious maybe in the next 6 to 12 months, but it lessens the pushback from the policymakers in terms of how this actually can be accepted hopefully in the near future. And it also facilitate collaboration between key stakeholders, especially with them, secure ability to actually have a dialogue with them, and hopefully we can have eventually data sharing so that we can really move forward together. I think the good regulatory practice initiative that we are doing now, hopefully it will bear fruit, because later when they start to understand and have similar or maybe close or near, to the understanding that we have in the industry, I think the pushback will be lesser, and then a lot of new initiatives can be pushed to them for them to then be part of the entire ecosystem, which is talking about fintech, techfin, blockchain, and everything else. That's what we are trying to do, and we are doing now in Malaysia.
Thank you, Rizwan. And I think that's a great note on which to conclude it. Rizwan spoke about trying to, when we talk about inclusion, being inclusive and bringing about regulators also into this discussion, or not just policy discussion, but understanding technology as well. Because if you want to frame policies on emerging technology, you need to understand the trends like what we discussed today, things like liquidity sitting on one hand in decentralized finance and exchanges, and the crypto economy, and the challenges of the real economy. There are so many questions which in their day-to-day jobs, regulators are just not, they've not been trained, they have not had the experience over their careers to even forget answering those questions. So it's a great approach. And I just want to conclude by saying that at Global Impact FinTech, or the GIFT Forum, we are trying to do that, exactly that, at a regional and at a global level. We are now a 60 country strong network and think tank of experts, and all of us who you see today are playing different roles within GIFT. We are trying to be this global bridge between not just regulators and policymakers, but also policymakers and the practitioners, as well as the thought leaders and academics across the world. So we are trying to build inter-country bridges, we are trying to build inter-regional bridges, and we are trying to build global bridges as well. And that is how we look forward in working closely with partners, including in Qatar as well, and in the MENA region. So I think this was a great discussion. There are more points that we could continue on, but I just want to spend maybe the last 5 to 10 minutes answering audience questions. And Sahana, if you need to drop out at a certain point, feel free to, but we'll just try and finish with 1 or 2 questions. So I'll ask, in fact, before you go, I think this is a question you are best placed to answer. This is anonymous, but one of our attendees is asking about a national ID system, and can it help in fostering inclusivity? I'm sure this is something which is very close to your heart, and you've done work on this, so maybe you may want to answer it.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Malik, and thank you for the question. I would add there are 2 elements to that. Does a national ID system help expanding financial inclusivity, and does a digital national ID system help? And they're 2 different things. They would contribute to the same. Definitely having an ID, a national ID for populations, is very, very helpful in financial inclusion, because it allows us to identify a person to an account, or to a wallet, or to a card. So it's, I would say, one of the cornerstones and the fundamentals for foundation of financial inclusion. And of course, these days, we're getting onto digital platforms for national IDs, and this allows the supply side, the government, the user as well, to be able to access an ID digitally, and to be able to share it also digitally for any of the different processes revolving around financial inclusion. It would allow seamless opening of accounts. So this is the Know Your Customer, or KYC process, where having an ID is super important. Different countries use different documents to prove an identity of person. It could be a driver's license, it could be a passport, it could also be in India, for example, before we had ration cards, sometimes even now. But having a national ID would add a layer of simplicity to what we can, digitalize and what can be used seamlessly in the nation. And it also allows for, and we're working on very exciting stuff around open banking, for example, or users' consent of data. And if you can digitalize your ID and have it with you to share as you wish when you're asking for an account, or when you're, for example, sending money, doing a remittance, for example, you need to prove who you are, or when you're receiving money, for example. So in a lot of different use cases for financial transactions and owning an account, I would say it's definitely very, very useful for countries to start looking at that. And nowadays, with the leap for digital, I would not only look at the national ID, but also highly recommend looking at digital IDs for your populations.
Thank you, Sahana. I think that's a great segue for me to slightly continue on this topic and expand further. I'll ask this to both Salman and Rizwan. We've heard Sahana talk about how digital ID, is perhaps the next phase, or it makes the whole process more seamless across public and private sector. Salman, one of the use cases we keep discussing about on applying blockchain, and you spoke about solving today's problems, is a national ID, or a kind of an ID system on the blockchain. So it also is secure, it's decentralized, no one entity including government owns your data. You have a view or an example of some best practices around that, and same with you, Rizwan, on using blockchain for a national ID or a national level ID system, or even an inter-country ID system, if there is any such example.
Unfortunately, no, there is no such practical examples, but maybe a POCs here and there. Estonia and other countries are exploring. To me, it's too early for SSI, self-sovereign IDs, because again, the point is that's some futuristic problem solving. Yes, we certainly can use blockchain for solving the current problems of the national IDs by bringing more trust. Blockchain is simply a trust enabler, and any kind of a record keeping, any kind of service offerings which require trust can be offered or can be recorded through the intervention of the blockchain. But when it comes to the SSI, it requires a completely different, I won't say business model, but a completely different user experience and different mindset, both from, again, it's going to be more on the decentralized side, which to me is, I don't see happening very soon. In certain areas, it is possible, for example, have health identification, and in some cases with the financial, although it's again a very difficult to implement with the anonymous IDs and all that. But to me, again, something should be done with the blockchain in the next year or two, rather than just thinking about it will solve the problems of the next 5 to 10 years. I would always be in a favor of solving the current problems with even a limited one. It will increment gradually. Once you will go to like a certain point, you will realize, okay, this is the benefit. Okay, this we can do more with blockchain. Then you can go for the next step. So SSI to me is like 5 to 10 years from now, and we should not wait for that. Rather, we should go for the immediate benefit of implementing blockchain for the national IDs and bringing more trust and fraud resilience.
Fair point.
I agree with what someone said, what Sarah said, and given the case in Malaysia, every adult in Malaysia already have a chip-based national ID. So I think for Malaysia, the step towards digital ID is quite close, and actually is very, very close, because the chip-based ID card that we have can also be used as an e-wallet actually at this point of time. But one of the key issues that we realize, and I relate it back to the good regulatory practice that I mentioned earlier, is the pushback by the policymaker, because they do not understand when we speak about the technology. And this is where they push it back and say, is it secure? Is it actually something that is can be defended in the case of issues? Because they are talking from their perspective. Hence the reason why we approach it in the way where we try to understand their psychology. We try to understand what actually makes them worry. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the best approach that we have adopted is let's talk about what you are familiar with, which is regulatory as well as policy making, but use the use cases is now we are trying to actually come out with a digital ID based on the chip-based card that we already have. Every single 12 years old in Malaysia already have a chip-based card. So if the government allow us to use that data, Malaysia actually could have a digital ID within the next 12 months. But because of the pushback on the mindset, hence we said, okay, this is not technology issue. This is mindset issue. And the reason it happened, in my point of view, is because they were excluded in the first place when all these were actually created. And now we have to go back to the drawing board and try to understand how to overcome the psychological fear that they have, the fear of the unknown and the fear of missing out, and try to then bring them back and make sure that they understand where we are going, what we are trying to do, and hopefully that moment will come sooner rather than later, and hopefully Malaysia can be an example of how a digital ID can be actually introduced for our nation. That's what's happening now, and that's why I really want to share about that.
Thank you, Rizwan. That's a great way to conclude this particular topic. And that was an interesting observation that, often the technology solutions of the technology stack is there. It's a question of adoption. It's a question of everybody becoming aligned and comfortable and understanding the implications of it. And this also ties in with what Salman said, that rather than waiting 5 or 10 years for the perfect solution or the optimal solution, start with something that can be delivered in the next 1 to 2 years and you work incrementally. That's really the agile approach or mindset that most of us would agree with. I think we have time for just one last question. We are a little over time, but we'll take one more. Dima, this is for you, coming from YouTube. Since we spoke about your to be launched virtual bank, the question is, how can we build trust in the market to encourage people to join digital banking, but also make your new bank profitable? If you want to answer this.
Sure. I think the challenge for us is double. One is to create a trust on the digital banking itself, meaning technology-wise and the storytelling and everything, and obviously the appropriate use case. And second is the trusted Sharia, because in Indonesia also there are in the market many different understanding of how a Sharia bank should be. It's quite complex actually. So we need to tackle those two things. But interestingly, trying to tackle these two things let us the potential profitability. So, for example, for this, if I split the market into the right wing and mass market, like those who are like loyalists, like on the right, like they've been trying to get the most Sharia banks possible in the market, and the number of them is growing very, very fast in Indonesia. And all they want to do is a simple Wadia savings account with no addition, no cashback, no nothing, no perks. And essentially, these can be a very good cost of fund from business perspective, obviously, right? So in our P2P, our pricing, loan pricing is equivalent to around 14 to 15% per annum on IDR basis. While at the same time, our cost of fund currently, because we're all passed through, it's about the same, right? 14 to 15. But imagine if the bank deposit grows in proportion to total cost of fund or source of fund, and it can be averaged down to near to 0%. That would be like huge profitability over there. So and the customers would be very happy because it's real Sharia compliant. So that's interesting sociologist understanding as well. And just to add to the point on technology, I think the element of storytelling is very, very important. The narrative and everything needs to go out to the market, needs to be very, very strong, because most often than not, I would say 50% of the success might be attributable to the storytelling, and the remaining is technology and security and everything. So that's what we're trying to do. We're working with different communities in Indonesia just to launch this. And obviously from regulatory standpoint, we're ISO certified. The regulator obviously going to test us before we launch, and we do pen tests and everything. And we hire like some of the best CIO, CISO in the market and everything. So creating that kind of trust on the real product, very strong customer service, and the storytelling as part of the movement, the reputable investors coming in, and the licenses, etc. So I guess these are the combination that we feel that will create a very profitable business, especially in the Sharia compliance space.
Thank you, Dima. That was a great way to conclude. I think to just sum it up, it's about and the different dimensions of trust. So trust from a technology standpoint, trust from a product standpoint, trust from maybe a religious and Sharia compliance standpoint. And I think that was an interesting point you made about storytelling and how your narrative comes about. It's not just about how trustworthy your product or your technology is, that has to be communicated, that has to be understood, that story has to be broadly shared, and people have to feel comfortable with it. And this is something which is very interesting, because in my 20 years in banking, one of the factors which came up again and again and again on why customers were reluctant on digital banking was exactly this. One of the things was trust. And I think we tried to approach it in a very, very traditional manner, and talking in jargons, etc. We were not thinking in terms of storytelling. So that was a very good input and insight. And always, coming from new players, there is something to learn. So with that, we've come to the end of our session today. There are a couple of more questions, but you can get in touch with the panelists or us directly, or you can get in touch with the organizers, and hopefully we'll be able to address your questions offline, because we've exceeded our time. With that, I want to thank all the 4 panelists here for their wonderful contributions. And I look forward to joining all of you again and hosting another panel soon with all of you on the continued discussions on the most important topics of the day when it comes to digital finance. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, and we hope to see you soon again.
Thanks very much.